So much. It's a pleasure to be back. I really enjoy doing these webinars, and I'm looking forward to giving you guys some high-impact, easy-to-use techniques to help you get your sponsor engaged and keep them engaged on your projects. So with a lot of the things we do at PMO Strategies, if we're going to engage in something, we're going to build a system based on our own techniques that we've used over the last 20 years to help create effective and sustainable change and to put the right programs in place to help get things done. The stuff that you see here is one part of the system that I have called Change Management Simplified. If you are interested in learning more about that, I will share how you can find out more about that training program at the end, and I am actually providing a discount specifically for those that are watching the ITMPI webinar. And also, if you are interested in getting a copy of this presentation, I will have two ways that you can do that at the end of the presentation today. I will show you how you can get a copy of all of this material and other resources. And if I will also email it to you as well. When I have your email address, I will send you a copy of this presentation. So hopefully you can just sit back and focus on the content, and if you have anything else going on, turn it off, because this is going to be probably the most valuable information that you can get to help figure out how you can train your sponsor to be engaged in your projects and help you get things done. Before we go into that, though, I would like to take you on a little journey of the data that I've seen from both being in a position of having to engage sponsors myself, as well as when I teach my courses and do my consulting and coaching. I hear a lot of the same kind of thing about sponsors. And it's pretty funny because it seems to be pretty universal. A lot of project managers will tell me that the engagement ended as soon as that charter was signed. And they were there, they helped you define the project, they helped you get the charter in place, and then you never heard from them again. And then I hear other people say, what? What do you mean? Your sponsors actually read the charter? I can't get them to write it, much less read it. I can't get them to engage even that far. You know, as far as I'm concerned, they're just the check writers in the organization. They give me the money, the funding to do my project, and that is all I see from them is budget approval, and that's it. Often we hear they are just way too busy to help, and it is next to impossible to get on their schedules. You never have any time that you can meet with them. If you have an urgent issue, it takes you 3 or 4 weeks to get on their calendar, and it's absolutely impossible to get what you need out of them, which, of course, is slowing down your projects. Many times, a lot of people will say, you know what, my sponsor just doesn't even seem to care about this project. Not only can I not get on their calendar, but even when I do, they seem like they'd rather be doing 5 other things than talking about the project that I'm on. They're not there for you when you're stuck. When you need help, when there are issues with the project, you will hear things like, what are you going to do about it, project manager, as opposed to what we'd like to be hearing, which is, how can I help? And so I always hear people say, if only there was another way to get my sponsor to engage, to get them to help me. And there is. I think there's a lot of good data out there, and we have a lot of experience ourselves in finding ways to get them and keep them engaged. And it requires kind of flipping the whole concept of our engagement process with a sponsor on its head. And that's what we'll get into today, because there is another way to do this. So to that, though, I want to share with you some common mistakes that we've seen in the role of sponsor, the mistakes that they're making. Favored in their support, and I know many of you have seen this, where the project manager is, getting a lot of energy and attention and excitement from that sponsor early on, and then the culture has a shift, the business has a shift, there's other priorities, and all of a sudden they're just not so interested in your project anymore. Or they said, yes, we're supportive, we're here for you, and this can be any stakeholders. The techniques we're talking about today can apply to any stakeholders, but specifically there's some things we need to do differently with how we engage our sponsors. A challenge I've seen is that, or a mistake that I've seen that sponsors make, is they delegate the role of sponsorship. Sometimes they delegate it down to such a level that the person actually in the room that's supposed to be able to make the decision either can't or is afraid to make the decision because it's been delegated too far down in the organization. Or, even worse, the person that's been delegated to doesn't actually care about your project and doesn't actually care about it being successful, and that's going to be a huge mistake and barrier to progress in your project. They're just not engaging in the projects, many of these sponsors, and we'll talk about why that is for many of them. If you can get them to engage, they might be okay working with you, but they are not building that coalition of support across the leadership team, both for their leadership and the leadership that you need in other parts of the organization that own those other resources you're going to need to get your project done. Sometimes I've seen where the sponsors, have this sit in their ivory tower and don't really get involved in the day-to-day of the project or talk to stakeholders about their concerns, their needs, that kind of thing. We get this I'm too busy kind of an attitude, or I shouldn't be involved in this level of detail. That's project work. I'm not a part of that. And that approach is what ends us in a pretty difficult situation. Before we go into how to fix all of this, I'd like you guys to take a minute to go and put yourself in the sponsor's shoes for a moment. Oftentimes what what those other two slides were, or what it looks like to us. So what it looks like to us and mistakes that they're making, but then why are they making those mistakes? Why are those things happening? And oftentimes, as project managers, we look at the sponsor and we just get so frustrated that they're not engaging and they just don't care, and we need them to care, and they're just not engaged the way we need them to. And for a moment, having been a sponsor myself on many projects, I'd like to share with you some of the sponsor perspective as to why this might be happening. Oftentimes, just the way you're feeling overextended, your sponsor might be overextended. They might have been asked to be a sponsor on too many projects or have too many projects of their own that are in the midst of being done, or they have a department that they're managing that has way too many people and way too many problems that they're spending their time and energy on. Sometimes what seems like a lack of interest or a lack of care might just be that they just don't have the capacity or the bandwidth that's necessary. Of the time where I see that there's a sponsor that's not engaged, it's because they actually don't know what's expected of them. You will either have that sponsor that is completely disconnected and disengaged, or, and sometimes even worse, that sponsor that is so involved in all the details and really, really engaged and trying so hard to be super, super helpful, and they are driving you absolutely crazy because they aren't actually doing what you need them to do. But sadly, their attempts to help you end up being painful because they're not clear on their role and they don't know what's expected of them. So there are a lot of shift in project models. So people will talk about project management and implementation methodology and mix all of that stuff together. And in those various methodologies, there are roles for sponsors in all of them, but oftentimes we get confused about what their role is based on that project model that we're following. So whether it's Agile or Waterfall or many of the other different variations of more traditional or more iterative models, the sponsor role can shift. And even in your organization, the role of a sponsor might be different than what they are used to. The proposition isn't clear for them on that project. So let's say they were in a position where they didn't actually start the project, but they got told, poof, you're a sponsor. And now they're trying to figure out, how do I justify this and how do I put my credibility on the line to support this? And they're not going to be able to do that if the value proposition isn't clear to them. Same way we feel like we don't have executive support, oftentimes the sponsors themselves don't have support from their leadership, either for the project or just in general. And so it's very difficult to be a sponsor and make good decisions on a project if your hands are tied